The restaurant was alive with soft chatter and the gentle clinking of silverware. Warm lights hung like glowing orbs above each table, casting a golden glow on polished glasses and white tablecloths. A faint aroma of rosemary and garlic drifted from the kitchen, wrapping the air in comfort. At a corner booth near the window sat her, the CEO, a woman of striking confidence, dressed in a navy suit that whispered wealth and authority. Her sleek ponytail and diamond-studded watch told stories of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But tonight, she seemed different. Her shoulders were tense, and her gaze darted toward the door every so often. At the opposite end of the restaurant, near the wall, sat him, the single dad. His posture was relaxed, almost invisible in the dim corner. A simple gray hoodie, a worn leather jacket slung over the chair. He had the kind of presence that made people glance once, then forget he was there. He didn't seem dangerous, just tired, like life had handed him too much, too soon. He swirled his coffee absently, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from the cup, but his ears were tuned to everything around him. The low hum of conversations, the shuffle of a waiter's shoes. And then, it was subtle at first. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The warm energy of the restaurant chilled as three men entered. They didn't belong here. The first man was broad-shouldered, his leather jacket creasing as he scanned the room with cold, predatory eyes. The second, tall and wiry, wore a grin that felt wrong, like a wolf who'd spotted prey. The third, stockier and younger, carried tension in his fists. They didn't wait for a table. They didn't speak to the hostess. They moved with purpose, their boots striking the floor in rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. The CEO froze. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand, catching the light as she tried to stay composed. She glanced at her phone but didn't reach for it. From his corner seat, the single dad's gaze sharpened. He'd seen men like this before. The swagger. The way they scanned for exits, checked reflections in the glass. It wasn't random. The man in the leather jacket leaned close to the CEO's table, his voice low but sharp. "Did you think you could ignore us?" The restaurant went silent. Knives paused mid-cut. Conversations died in throats. The CEO's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. A young waiter stepped forward nervously, clutching his notepad like a shield. "Excuse me, sirs. Is there a problem here?" The tallest of the three turned, his grin vanishing. "Mind your business," he hissed. The waiter backed away, glancing toward the kitchen. But no one moved. People were scared. This wasn't a movie scene. This was real. The man in the corner sighed softly, almost to himself. His hand brushed over the smooth surface of the table as he stood. He moved quietly, like a shadow stretching toward the danger. Nobody noticed him at first. He wasn't the type you noticed. Not until he was close enough that you could smell the faint scent of worn leather and cedar soap. "Hey," his voice cut through the tense silence, calm but commanding. All three men turned. The single dad wasn't tall, but something about him made the room feel smaller. His eyes were steady, like deep water, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. The man in the leather jacket smirked. "You got a problem, old man?" "Yeah," the single dad said quietly. "You're standing too close to her." A ripple of shock moved through the restaurant. People exchanged glances, unsure of what would happen next. The wiry man laughed, stepping forward. "Look, hero, why don't you sit back down before you get hurt?" The single dad tilted his head slightly, studying him. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. And then, softly, almost like a whisper, "Last chance. Leave." The laughter from the attackers faltered. The man in the leather jacket stiffened. Something in the single dad's tone had shifted the energy in the room. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. A fact. The CEO's breath caught as she watched him. There was something different about this stranger. The way he stood, not tense, not panicked. Balanced. Ready. She noticed his hands. Calm, steady, fingers relaxed at his sides. This wasn't a man bluffing. He'd done this before. The restaurant felt frozen in time. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Somewhere, a fork clinked against a plate, the sound deafening in the silence. The man in the leather jacket sneered, but his eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Or what?" he finally spat. The single dad's gaze didn't waver. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. And for the first time, the three attackers looked uneasy. The CEO's heart pounded, so loud she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to say something, to warn him, but the words stuck in her throat. The wiry man reached into his jacket pocket. The single dad's hand moved faster than anyone could see. Gasps filled the restaurant. Someone whispered, "What is he?" And just like that, everything changed. The wiry man's hand hovered inside his jacket, his fingers curling around something metallic. The single dad's eyes narrowed. In a single fluid motion, he stepped forward, silent, controlled, a shadow slicing through the golden light of the restaurant. A gasp rippled through the diners. Someone whispered, "He's going to get himself killed." But there was something different about him now. A stillness. An energy that made every heartbeat in the room feel loud. The wiry man barely had time to pull out the knife before his wrist was caught mid-motion. The sound was sharp, a crack, like a twig snapping. The knife clattered onto a plate, shattering the quiet. The single dad didn't raise his voice. Didn't even look angry. "Don't," he murmured, his tone calm, but carrying an edge that made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand up. The wiry man hissed in pain, stumbling back. The broad-shouldered leader snarled, grabbing a chair and hurling it toward him. The sound of wood scraping against tile echoed like thunder. The restaurant erupted. People screamed. Chairs toppled. Plates shattered. The CEO froze in place, her heart pounding. She couldn't look away. The single dad sidestepped the flying chair with terrifying precision, moving with the grace of a trained fighter. His hands never shook. His breathing was steady. He wasn't fighting like a man defending himself. He was calculating, predicting every move before it happened. The stocky attacker charged. A fist flew. The single dad ducked, caught his arm, and twisted. Another snap echoed, followed by a scream. For a moment, everything slowed. The CEO saw him clearly now, silhouetted in the warm light like a warrior from some forgotten story. His hoodie shifted just enough to reveal something at his wrist. A faint tattoo. Not decorative. Military. Her mind raced. She'd seen tattoos like that before, during a trip overseas where she'd met security contractors and military personnel. It wasn't just ink, it was a mark. A symbol. Who was this man? The CEO's phone buzzed in her hand, but she didn't dare move. She felt safer staying still, as if making a sound might shatter the strange calm he carried. The broad-shouldered leader growled, stepping forward now. He was angry, but also cautious. He circled the single dad like a predator sizing up another predator. "You think you're a hero?" the man spat. The single dad's lips twitched in the faintest smirk. "No, I'm a dad who doesn't like bullies." The leader lunged. A punch flew. The single dad blocked, countered, and in a blink, the larger man was slammed against a wall, gasping for air. The sound of impact reverberated like a drumbeat. Silence fell again. The wiry man clutched his injured wrist. The stocky one groaned on the floor. The leader wheezed against the wall, stunned. The single dad stood there, chest rising and falling slowly, as if this were just another Tuesday night. His eyes scanned the room once, checking for threats, before landing on the CEO. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, steady. She shook her head, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight. The leader managed to stand, wiping blood from his lip. "You've made a big mistake, old man," he growled. The single dad tilted his head slightly, like he'd heard this line before. "Yeah," he said softly, "so have you." There was something in his tone that made even the attackers hesitate. Something cold, sharp, and unshakable. The broad-shouldered man glanced at his crew. "Let's go," he muttered. The wiry one hesitated, glaring at the single dad like he wanted revenge. But the look in the dad's eyes was enough to kill the thought. They slipped out the door, vanishing into the night, leaving chaos in their wake. The restaurant was silent, save for the clinking of broken glass being swept by a nervous busboy. The CEO finally found her voice. Who are you?" she whispered. The single dad turned his gaze toward her. For a moment, his expression softened, revealing something underneath the steel in his eyes. A quiet sadness. "Just a guy who wanted to eat his dinner," he said with a faint smile. But she didn't believe it. Not for a second. As he walked past her table, his hoodie shifted again, and this time she saw it clearly. Another mark on his forearm. Not just military. Special Forces. And there, in his wallet's clear ID window, was a photo of a little girl with bright eyes and curly hair. His daughter. The CEO's hand trembled as she reached for her phone to call the police. But before she could dial, she heard a sound outside, a motorcycle engine roaring to life. The attackers weren't gone. They were waiting. The night outside the restaurant was thick and heavy, the kind of darkness that swallowed streetlights whole. The hum of the motorcycle engine rumbled like distant thunder, growing louder, circling. Inside, people whispered nervously, glancing at the door. Waiters clutched trays close to their chests, unsure whether to run or hide. The single dad stood still near the window. His eyes narrowed as he tracked the sound outside. He didn't look scared. He looked alert, like a soldier listening for enemy footsteps in a jungle clearing. The CEO's breathing slowed, but her hands trembled as she dialed the police. Her mind raced. Who is this man? Why does he move like that? Why does he look so ready? Her voice was shaky as she spoke into the phone. Yes, we were attacked. Please send officers immediately. But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the thought. Why isn't he panicking? The single dad turned to a young busboy frozen near the counter. Lock the back door, he said quietly. The boy blinked. WH what? Lock. The back. Door, he repeated, his voice calm but firm. The boy ran to obey. Everyone stay low, stay quiet, he added, glancing at the rest of the staff and diners. They listened. His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. The CEO noticed how effortlessly he took control. He wasn't just protecting her, he was managing a situation. Like he'd done this 1,000 times before. For a moment, as he crouched near the window, his reflection in the glass brought back flashes he couldn't suppress. Sand whipping through the air. The smell of gunpowder. A comrade screaming for a medic. The crack of a rifle echoing through a canyon. His breathing hitched for half a second. He blinked and forced himself back to the present. He couldn't afford to drift. Not now. The motorcycle engine roared closer. Outside, the leader of the attackers sat astride the bike, a cigarette glowing faintly between his lips. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting. Watching. The wiry man leaned against a nearby lamppost, clutching his injured wrist. But smirking like this was just getting interesting. The stocky one sat in the shadows of an alley, wiping sweat from his forehead. They weren't done. The single dad shifted slightly, reaching into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for his wallet. He looked at the worn photo of his daughter. Her bright smile softened the hard edges of his face. Stay safe, Peanut, he whispered under his breath, tucking the photo away. He didn't want this fight. He never wanted any of them. But danger had a way of finding him, no matter how far he ran from his past. She watched him carefully now, her fear mingling with something else. Intrigue. You're not just some guy, are you? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. He glanced over his shoulder, his gaze sharp but unreadable. I'm just a dad, he said softly. But his eyes told a different story. The motorcycle's engine cut off. Silence fell over the street outside. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl. He straightened slowly, scanning the restaurant for exits, obstacles, and anything that could be used as a weapon. His movements were efficient, almost rehearsed. The CEO noticed the subtle scars on his hands, the faint stiffness in his left shoulder. This wasn't a man who'd lived a quiet life. The single dad moved toward the door, pausing just before reaching it. He tilted his head slightly, listening. A soft crunch of gravel outside confirmed what he already knew. They're still here, he muttered. The CEO's heart pounded. Shouldn't we wait for the police? He shook his head slowly. They won't get here in time. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. Stay low. Stay quiet. When I say move, you move. Got it. She nodded quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Something about his calmness was terrifying and comforting. The glass door creaked as the leader pushed it open slowly. The restaurant's warm light spilled onto his face, revealing a sinister grin. "Thought you were tough, huh?" he taunted. "Let's see how tough you are now." The wiry man slipped in behind him, holding a pipe. The stocky one stayed outside, blocking the alley. The CEO's hands gripped the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles turned white. The single dad exhaled slowly, like a man about to step into familiar territory. He reached behind his back, not for a gun, not for a knife, but for something unexpected. A simple leather belt. With one swift motion, he looped it around his fist, turning it into a makeshift weapon. His stance shifted. His breathing slowed. The attackers hesitated, confused. And for the first time that night, the leader's grin faltered. The restaurant lights flickered slightly, casting long, trembling shadows across the polished floors. The hum of tension was deafening. The leader stepped forward, pipe glinting in his accomplice's hand, and sneered. "You should have stayed quiet, old man." The single dad didn't flinch. He flexed his fingers inside the loop of his belt, tightening it like a seasoned craftsman preparing his tool of choice. His stance shifted. Weight low, shoulders relaxed, like a predator coiled to strike. Then he moved. The first attacker swung the pipe, a sharp whoosh cutting through the air. The single dad ducked effortlessly, twisting his torso just enough to let the weapon sail past. He grabbed the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting hard. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. The wiry man screamed, dropping the pipe. In a single fluid motion, the single dad's belt snapped forward, striking across his face with a sharp thwack. Gasps erupted from the diners huddled in corners. The leader charged next, his boots pounding against the tile. He swung a heavy punch aimed at the single dad's jaw. But the dad stepped aside, smooth as water flowing around stone. He drove his elbow into the man's ribs with surgical precision, the breath rushing out of him in a wheeze. Before the leader could recover, the belt snapped again, this time catching his arm and yanking him forward. With a brutal slam, the dad shoved him face first into a table, silverware clattering to the ground. The stocky attacker stormed in from outside, roaring as he raised a broken chair leg like a club. The single dad spun, his expression calm, eyes calculating. He wrapped the belt around the man's weapon arm mid-swing, jerking him off balance. In one motion, he swept the man's legs with a swift kick, sending him crashing to the floor. The fight wasn't wild or messy. It was methodical. Every strike was measured. Every movement had purpose. It was artistry. The CEO crouched low behind her table, hands clamped over her mouth. She couldn't look away. Who is he? She thought, heart pounding. No one moves like this. No one. She'd seen action movies, but this was different. He wasn't fighting like an actor. He was fighting like a man who had been here before. Too many times. And she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't enjoying it. He didn't want to fight, but he was built for it. The leader staggered to his feet, blood trickling from his nose. He grabbed a steak knife from a nearby table, fury blazing in his eyes. "You're dead," he snarled, lunging forward. The single dad sidestepped, twisting the man's wrist until the knife clattered to the floor. In one swift motion, he swept the man's leg and slammed him into a chair, snapping the wooden frame under his weight. The restaurant fell silent again. The three men writhed on the floor, groaning in pain. The wiry one clutched his broken wrist. The stocky one's face was pale as he gasped for air. The leader glared up, hatred burning in his eyes, but fear had finally found him. The single dad crouched down to eye level, his voice low and deadly calm. "Go home. If I see you again, I won't be this nice." None of them argued. The attackers scrambled out the door, dragging each other into the alley. The roar of the motorcycle engine soon faded into the distance. For a moment, the restaurant was utterly still. The only sounds were soft sobs from a frightened diner, the distant sirens growing closer, and the steady breathing of the man who'd just saved them all. The single dad exhaled sharply, loosening the belt from his fist. His shoulders slumped just slightly, the adrenaline ebbing away. He turned and locked eyes with the CEO. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, still too stunned to speak. "You," she managed to whisper. He gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Been through worse." The sirens outside wailed louder, red and blue lights flashing against the restaurant windows. Relief rippled through the room. But the single dad's expression darkened. He slipped his wallet back into his pocket and muttered under his breath, "They'll be back." The CEO's breath caught. What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He was already scanning the street outside, every muscle taut, every sense sharp. Somehow, she knew this wasn't over. The restaurant's front windows pulsed red and blue as police cars skidded to a stop outside. Officers rushed in, weapons drawn, barking orders. "Hands where I can see them." The diners obeyed, their trembling hands raised. The CEO slid out from under the table, her body shaking, but her eyes stayed fixed on the man who had saved her life. The single dad raised his hands slowly, calm and collected. "Sir, are you armed?" an officer barked. "No," he said evenly, his voice steady as stone. "Check the alley." They went that way. The cops stormed past him, leaving him standing there under the harsh strobe of flashing lights. He looked out the window, scanning the darkness beyond the glass, his jaw tight. They'd be back. He could feel it in his bones. She stepped toward him, her heels clicking softly on the tile. You knew what you were doing out there." He gave a faint shrug, his gaze still fixed on the street. "Just a bad habit I can't shake." That wasn't a habit. That was, she struggled for words. Training. Military. Special forces. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something there. Pain, maybe regret. "You ask too many questions. I watched you take down 3 armed men like it was nothing," she whispered. "You saved all of us. And now you're telling me you're just some guy." For a moment, he didn't answer. His fingers traced the scar on his knuckle, and his mind wandered back. A desert sun, scorching and merciless. The smell of sand and gunpowder. Orders yelled over radio static. The sound of helicopters fading into the horizon. And then his daughter's face. A little girl running across a park, arms outstretched, calling his name. That was why he left. That was why he buried this part of himself. He shook the memory away, his expression hardening. "I used to be someone else," he said quietly. "That man died a long time ago." The police returned, their radios crackling. "Perpetrators are gone. Looks like they had backup. We'll keep a patrol out here tonight." The single dad nodded, but his gut told him something the police didn't know. This wasn't random. This was targeted. He glanced at the CEO. Her trembling hand still clutched her phone. Her lips parted, as if she was about to speak, but no words came. "You were their target," he said softly. Her eyes widened. "What?" "They weren't here for me. They were here for you." She hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor. There have been threats," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A hostile acquisition deal. A competitor. But I didn't think." She stopped, swallowing hard. He nodded slowly. "Well, now it's real." He pulled out a chair and sat down, rubbing his temples. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and a creeping dread. "You need security," he muttered. "I have security," she shot back, her voice cracking. He looked up at her sharply. "You had security. Those guys wouldn't have gotten this close if they were doing their job." Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from realization. "You," she whispered. "You're better than all of them, aren't you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his wallet again, pulling out the photo of his daughter. He stared at it for a moment, his thumb brushing over her bright smile. "I promised her I'd stay out of this life," he said softly. "No more violence. No more fighting." Then he looked up at the CEO, his expression steely. "But I also promised her I'd always do the right thing." She felt her breath catch. "So what now?" she asked. He slid the photo back into his wallet, stood, and adjusted his jacket. "Now." He glanced at the window, scanning the darkness beyond the flashing lights. "Now we wait. Because this isn't over." As if on cue, a phone rang. It wasn't hers. It wasn't his. One of the downed attackers had left a burner phone on the floor, buzzing violently against the tile. He bent down, picked it up, and pressed it to his ear without a word. A voice on the other end spoke, cold and calm. "Nice work tonight. But you can't protect her forever." The line went dead. He lowered the phone, his jaw tightening. The CEO's breath trembled as she whispered, "Who was that?" He slipped the phone into his pocket. "Someone who just made this personal.